Good evening and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Monday, May 7th, 2012. I'm Christopher Conover. The state legislature adjourned sine die last week. The dust is starting to settle. So what happened? Joining us now in the studio are State Senator Paula Abboud, State Senator Al Melvin, State Representative Matt Hines, and State Representative Ted Vogt. And joining me to talk with the members of the Southern Arizona delegation is Andrea Kelly. Everybody, welcome.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all for coming. Let's start talking about some of the legislation that you all had going this session. Matt Hines, we're going to start with you. You had a couple bills that worked on algae agriculture. Can you tell us about those? And those passed, correct?
Yeah, they did, actually, which is unusual. The legislature doesn't usually have too many Democratic bills that get through. But yeah, these bills were basically to put the cultivation of algae on a level playing field with all other agriculture. And I had a bipartisan co-sponsor and got through both chambers and signed by the governor, fortunately.
How about your breast cancer? That was really exciting.
Yeah, the bill, another bill that got worked into the budget to help with low-income women who are seeking breast cancer treatment who were previously denied due to bureaucratic red tape. We cleaned that up and actually got a $2 million appropriation for that program, which, matched by the feds, will be $8 million for low-income women to receive breast cancer treatment.
Now, we had all of you except Senator Melvin in January to talk about what was going to be coming during the session, and that's why you're all back, and Senator Melvin has agreed to join us for this one. One of the things in that show, Representative Vogt, you talked about one of your goals was tort reform or litigation reform for people who don't follow the legislature close. How'd you do?
It was sort of a mixed bag. Some of the bills got through. For instance, making it a little bit easier for parties that are victims of frivolous lawsuits. We made it a little bit easier for them to seek their attorney's fees. However, probably what I would say my bigger piece of legislation, collateral source, the abrogation of the collateral source rule, actually got tied up over in the Senate. The Senate president did not end up assigning it to a committee for a hearing, which I find unfortunate, but these things happen. You win some, you lose some, and you go back and you try again.
And Senator Al Melvin, a couple of the bills that you sponsored, one was a push to get some spent nuclear fuel storage to pay for education. And that one, I believe, did not pass?
No, it did.
It did
but
pass.
It was a memorial, so.
Okay.
But it party line vote, but a good solid vote in the Senate and the House. Basically, it's a sense of the Arizona Senate and House to the President of the United States, the U.S. Senate and House, saying that Arizona is interested in nuclear energy. We have the largest nuclear facility in the country at Palo Verde with 3 reactors, and we're looking at recycling spent fuel rather than burying it. The French recycled 96% and have to dispose of 4% as opposed to 100% disposal in Yucca Mountain. And we're also looking at a training reactor to generate medical isotopes to fight cancer and heart disease, and in conjunction with the Mayo Clinic and our universities. So that was pretty exciting. But the one bill that I'm proud of is the federal lands bill, which was signed into law by the governor of Utah. We used the same language in Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, here in New Mexico. You know, before I got to the Senate 4 years ago, I didn't realize that every state in the East is roughly 98% private land, but we're 18% or less. The federal government has almost 50%, so this bill addresses that issue.
And Senator, about one of the things you talked about when you were here last time, one of your priorities, small business and health care funding. We know the dust is barely settled on this session, but how did you do with those priorities?
I had probably the only jobs bill in the legislature. It was a job training bill. Senator Melvin supported it. I think everybody at this table voted for it. It was stalled for a long time in the House, and there was one lobbyist at the Phoenix Chamber that just stuck a knife in it, and it came back to the legislature, came back to the Senate, and for some reason, the The governor didn't want it. Somebody didn't want it. And so, unfortunately, it was only $100,000. It's going to potentially create 1,350 jobs. So
it was
pretty
a great
sad.
bill. We had a lot of fun working on it together.
Yep.
And I even had a chance to go over to the House to testify in favor of it.
I think we made history having a Republican testify on a Democratic bill.
Right. It was
But,
fun.
yeah, trying to push for kids' care, that was such a big issue in the budget. And the unfortunate piece is that the governor basically didn't support it. She wasn't going to have it in her budget. And, you know, I remember standing on the floor and saying how disappointed I am that a governor who's a mother not supporting health care for children. So that was a big disappointment. I think that's a big disappointment for Arizona. It's a disappointment for the hospitals. It's a disappointment for the kids and the parents. So that's truly one of the heartaches from this legislature.
Just before we move on, we're going to talk about the budget, but I wanted to ask you, Senator Melvin, about your Poet Laureate bill.
Yes, a little lighthearted bill there. I think it took Democratic support to get that baby done, but I'm proud of it.
Why are you interested in getting an Arizona State Poet Laureate?
A resident of my community in Saddlebrook is a poet, and I didn't realize how many poets there are in the state. There are many, and I didn't realize that the U of A and ASU, both universities, have substantial poetry centers. It was just a good bill. It puts us in league with about 46 other states now, but it helps in the written and spoken word of English. That Poet Laureate will travel the state, going to our schools to promote poetry, and it was just a great bill. The Arizona Commission on the Arts was behind it. They're the ones who will determine who the Poet Laureate will be, and it literally got done yesterday. We pushed it out of the House, and it's going up to the governor.
There were several people, as they explained their votes, either did it in rhyme or as a limerick. So it gave a little bit of levity to the very last day of the session, but it did go through.
Let's talk about the budget. Everything always hinges on the budget, or so many things do, because so many things have money in them. Senator, about when we were all together last, you thought that State Senate President, he was the new Senate President at the time, Steve Pierce, would give Democrats a seat at that budget negotiating table. Did that happen? For those of us watching from 100 miles away, I'm not sure you got the seat you were looking for, but from someone who was up there, did you feel like that happened?
Not in the Senate, not really. And it wasn't Steve Pierce that gave us a seat. For a while, when the leadership of the House and the Senate were stalled in budget talks with the governor, some of the assistant leaders in the Senate started negotiating with the Democrats and trying to craft a budget because they weren't sure they were going to be able to get a budget out with the governor. So it was a double negotiation, negotiating with the Democrats, negotiating with the governor, and then ultimately who prevailed was Steve Pierce negotiating with the governor and probably Andy Tobin. I don't know what role Andy Tobin, the speaker, played.
But interestingly enough, I know in my discussions with my fellow Republican senators, the Democratic budget was pretty attractive and was within the ballpark. I think the governor, the Senate, the House, and the Democratic budget were relatively close. But one thing I want to mention every time this subject comes up is budgets are near and dear to every family who is viewing this show. The family sits down and has to work out the budget where you don't spend more than you make. And now our current budget is balanced, and this one that we just approved is balanced as well. And that's no small achievement, and I think most families can appreciate it. Many states don't have a balanced budget, and I'm proud of this $8.6 billion budget. I really am.
Well, but let's talk about the balanced budget, because in order to balance that budget, $50 million was taken out of the foreclosure settlement and put into the budget to help balance the budget. This is a state that has the greatest or second greatest number of foreclosures and needs the vast amount of help that $100 million was going to pose for Arizona. Relief and education for our people that are losing homes.
But I want to clarify that. The overall settlement for the state of Arizona was $1.6 billion for those people who were impacted by fraudulent foreclosures or wrongful foreclosures. That money, $1.5 billion of it, went directly to the wronged parties. The Attorney General crafted in the settlement that $100 million go directly to his office, and some of that was going to be used for education programs, PSAs, things like that. And in this economy, and with with all the issues that we're facing in the state, there are more important things than running PSAs on homeowner loans. It's very important that we do invest in education, that we do invest in healthcare. And John Kavanaugh, the approach chair, made a very, very important point that in the wording of that settlement, it said this money is to help the state for the negative impacts of the foreclosure crisis. Arizona is one of the hardest hit states. We lost one of our prime economic drivers, the housing industry, and the state had to make a lot of that up. So that $50 million is being used as it should be used to defray the cost of the wrongful foreclosures and the bubble bursting from our home building.
I also heard an argument from Representative Kavanaugh. I don't remember if it was on the floor or somewhere or in an interview that we did with him, that money never should have gone to the Attorney General anyway. That should have come into the general fund anyway, and it's the job of the legislature to appropriate this. We've been through this in court back when Janet Napolitano was governor. And that money became almost a philosophical argument, if you will, on the use of it. So I'd love to hear some of you chime in on that.
Those kinds of arguments happen all the time. We hear, those things shouldn't have happened, and the courts shouldn't have ruled the way they ruled, because we hear that all the time. The point is that $50 million that was going to help foreclosure is now going to help build private prisons.
No, well, it's going into the general fund.
And we're funding $24 million into private prisons, which are more costly than state-run prisons.
And we are returning money to education and healthcare. I mean, the University of Arizona, one of the pieces that I'm most pleased with in this budget is that we got $6 million this year and next year in ongoing funding for the U of A medical school up in Phoenix. Very important thing. So the money's going into the general fund, and just to say that money's going directly into fund private prisons is not accurate. It's going into the general fund, and that settlement was for the state of Arizona, and it should have gone to the general fund to begin with.
I think that it's important to point out that over the past 4 years, my entire tenure in the legislature, I believe $2.2 billion has been slashed from education. If you aggregate if you aggregate the university cuts and also K through 12, so putting back $40 million of ongoing spending for a reading program is great, but absolutely not adequate. And in terms of the economy and the sector, the healthcare sector, jobs in healthcare are plummeting. Carondelet laid people off the last time I was here. I remember we talked about the layoffs at Carondelet, and we just heard that the Tucson Heart Hospital is closing. And that is exactly what I was worried about because of the huge cuts to access to the childless adult population, nearly $500 million. When you put federal matching with that, $1.5 billion taken out of the healthcare sector. And the hospitals in Cochise County and in the rural areas, that is sometimes their largest employer. So one of the most important things I was hoping for in this budget discussion was to put back some of the increase that provider rate that Access is reimbursing the hospitals to keep our high-skilled, non-outsourceable labor pool, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, employed and right here. Because those high-skilled folks in healthcare, there aren't enough positions and places in Tucson and in southern Arizona to absorb those losses. So they're going to leave when those community hospitals close.
You know, Matt, it's interesting that you would mention the fourth year, because this is my fourth year at the Senate. And one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize in Arizona is it took the state 90 years from 1912 to 2002 to reach a general fund budget of $6.3 billion. 90 years to reach that. Yet in 6 years under the previous governor, it almost doubled to 11.6, and that's what we were facing when I arrived at the legislature. We went from 11.6 to 8.6, and we've never let per pupil K through 12 public education funding drop below $9,000 per child. It's slightly below that right now at about, with this budget, about $8,700, but I'm confident it'll be back up to $9,000.
And we could sit and talk budget for hours,
Yes.
no
We
doubt. But let's go ahead and move on to another topic. This was an interesting session due to the people who were there at the beginning of the session and weren't at the end of the session. We had 3 members who resigned due to various ethics. We had Richard Miranda, who resigned before anything came up and then was charged with tax fraud. We had Senator Bungard, who resigned amidst an ethics hearing. And then we had our own Representative Patterson, who resigned right before a vote that could have potentially expelled him. You were chairing that ethics committee. You had a tough run.
It is very difficult. You know, everyone tries to say that you know, these things are huge distractions, and they really are. You know, fortunately, in the state of Arizona, we haven't had to have a lot of ethics investigations. You know, people who go up there are honorable people and they try hard. And so it's very rare that we have something like this. So there's not a lot of precedence of how these things are conducted. So you want to make sure that you are dealing with the issue at hand. You're not creating a precedence that's going to be harmful in the future. But at the end of the day, we have a job to do. We've got to get the state of Arizona back on track and moving. And when you've got something like this, it becomes a huge distraction, and it's difficult. I know it was difficult over in the Senate. It's very difficult over in the House when something like that happens.
How would the rest of you?
I would like to say one thing. Representative Vogt has had service in the Air Force. I had 30 years in the U.S. Naval Reserve. And I think all of us in both parties go up there with the best intentions. But I mention the military because of the high standards of personal conduct that the military has. And that's the way I look at the legislature. We're serving a cause greater than ourselves. We have to have the highest standards of conduct. And when people don't meet those standards, as these 3, in my view, didn't, then they should be replaced.
And in addition to those 3 who were in ethics situations or investigations or complaints, there's the usual level of turnover when people are seeking other offices and they resign. And then we had the recall of the Senate president before the session started. How would the rest of you say that affects the lawmaking process?
I think it's really difficult because we work as a team. Whether it's our Democratic team, we have to work within our own caucus, and the continuity is important, and then we have to work with the members available. Actually, Jerry Lewis came in. I know that it was difficult for a lot of the members in the Senate to think that they had lost, you know, somebody that they considered, you know, an esteemed leader in Russell Pierce, and yet there were many others who were delighted to not have the stress of all the immigration bills and the difficult pieces of legislation. But I found Jerry Lewis wonderful to work with. He's a very intelligent human being, very friendly and very thoughtful. So sometimes, and I worked in another session where 2 legislators stepped out to run for Congress, and we had 2 new people off the street. And quite frankly, bringing new energy in was exciting because they didn't know the party line, and so a lot of times those Republicans would end up voting with the Democrats and helping us out a little bit.
And I think our first year, Matt, for you and me, I remember that was a tough year. We stayed in session for all intents and purposes. Although, right into literally till the end of the year. And I think despite all of the things you mentioned, it was a pretty good year, actually. We didn't have any really late sessions, and we ended it relatively on time, and I think it went pretty good.
I recall being there until 7:30 in the morning when we finally finished one of the budgets. Overnight.
In years past.
Right.
Even last session.
But not now.
Well, and our legislature isn't that big. There are 30 senators, there are 60 representatives, 90 total elected officials up there. We really are a family. We have disagreements, but we've got to hang together, and we've got to accomplish the greater good, which is getting Arizona back on track. And so, if you do have a member who leaves, it does upset things. And I mean, the 50th legislature, the 100th anniversary of the state, we had a little bit of everything this year. Even up to the very end, we had our first seated independent on the floor.
Right.
Just wonderful guy, Mr. Fontana. It was so unique. And what makes it unique is not only the problems that you are dealing with at the time, but also the people you serve with. And so, I know that Senator Abowd and Mr. Hines, they're going to be moving on to other things. And the good Lord willing, Senator Melvin and I will be back there. But it's been an honor really serving with all three of these members.
Likewise.
I just wanted to say that good things are happening. I heard today that Arizona ranks number 10 in the top 10, number 10, of the best states to do business in. I happened to hear that on the radio as I was driving in. And also that we're in the top 10, I think number 7 for startups, for new companies. So, I think, and the fact that we do have, this is the second balanced budget, truly balanced without gimmicks and sweeps, and it sends a good signal to the business community, both here in the state and companies looking to moving here.
And we will be in balance, and we will be in balance till 2014. And I think that's probably the most impressive thing that this legislature has done. We've looked out because we know there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the economy. This recession seems to be persistent. Even with the jobs numbers that were announced last Friday, that it's just really hanging on. And we also know there are a couple things on our future. The 1 cent sales tax that voters put into place goes away at the end of 2013, and national health care may or may not go into effect. With those things on the horizon, this legislature made the choice that we need to plan out at least 3 years and make sure that we've got enough money, because it has been this yo-yo effect where people don't know what they can depend on. Do we have to claw back money? We don't want to rush forward and spend too much money only to take it back the next session. So I think probably the most valuable thing that this legislature has done is giving the 51st legislature breathing room, opportunity to plan forward and not react to what has been, save the Great Depression, the worst economic travesty in the history of the United States.
But let's put a little perspective on this. You just passed a capital gains tax cut that's going to total in 6 years $310 million. That's taking those dollars out of our general fund without creating one job. Capital gains doesn't create a job. So while you say we're struggling to balance that budget with the 1 cent sales tax going away, they just did another tax cut.
Well, and also in that bill, there was the capital gains tax cuts. There was some small business tax cuts.
Credits.
There was
that
some
benefited?
good tax credits, absolutely, that I would have voted for independently, and possibly some of the other Democrats. I know.
But those got changed, and those got
They
got changed to benefit 2 major corporations, Intel and Raytheon, and really don't help small businesses or our rural communities.
That is
that
valid.
happened on the last day of session.
But those things go to what Senator Melvin was talking about. We need to create an environment, because this recession has been persistent. We need to create a business-friendly environment, and it's paying off. But we're ranked at number 10 as a place to do business. The Phoenix area has been number 7 in terms of new job growth. Those things are working.
Part of the business-friendly environment, which I agree we have to have here and foster, is having adequate educational funding and support so that we have those entrepreneurial students and then young entrepreneurs starting up the businesses, or so that Raytheon has engineers to hire. Right now they're still struggling with that. So we cannot forget that it's not just tax policy that creates an ideal business environment. It is to have higher education and strong funding for and robustly funded K through 12 education.
And a trained workforce.
And a trained workforce, exactly.
And 50% of our budget, which is over $8.6 billion, is invested in education, K through university.
And we're 49th in per pupil spending. So it's not the dollar amount, it's the quality and the essence of what we're giving to them as well.
That's why
You can tell that this is what we do in the legislature.
I would like to say one thing. I had the opportunity to go to Sacramento recently on a legislative trip with a group called the Border Legislative Conference, made up of legislators from the 4 U.S. border states and the 6 Mexican border states, and spent about 3 days there. And looking at the Sacramento Bee the day that we left, the third day, talking about jacking taxes through the roof, soaking the rich, I just can't wait to get on the telephone with others to start calling businesses in California. I think with the atmosphere that we've created here, many will be moving here. They won't be flying over or driving through to Texas. They'll be stopping in Arizona.
I think you actually had proposed, maybe it was last year, buying billboards to put on the California-Arizona
and I'd like
border.
to see one in Sacramento, right, as close to the Capitol building as possible.
One thing I think that we haven't talked about, and as a medical doctor, this has been one of the most disturbing sessions for women's health. And every year that I've been there, attacks on women's health. And I have seen more bills than in any of the other 3 sessions about whether it's abortion or restricting contraceptive hormone therapy. It's been really.
Now, I hate to cut you off on this, but we only have 30 seconds left. Let me jump to Senator Melvin just for a quick response on that. Do you see it as a war on women?
No, I don't. When you talk about abortion, we look at it as the sanctity of life from conception to natural death. We're 180 degrees out on this, but there is no class warfare by sex, by gender, by skin color, or class, or money.
Unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. We've got to.
26 bills run against women's rights.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. We could kill a whole half hour on that. For all of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. You can see this show again and get more news and information on our website, azpm.org. And you can comment on this show or anything else on that website also. We can also be reached via Facebook and Twitter. Coming up tomorrow night, the Modern Streetcar Project in Tucson is moving forward. We'll have an update. Also, we'll learn about bomb-eating bugs. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks so much for joining us.